This week, what a 2030 world with very cheap batteries would look like. You may never trip over an extension cord again.
A new startup is planning to sell hydrogen-powered bicycles. Is this the future of e-mobility?
Oh, the humanity.
Could a solution to the migrant challenge in Europe be to assist Africa with developing clean energy? It may be cheaper than building a wall, although arguably, if you listen to previous episodes, that wall could be a solar wall.
The city of Paris has reduced air pollution in the city by 40% in anticipation of this summer's Olympic Games. All they had to do was limit their residents' smoking to a pack a day.
Oh, zing! All that and more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And also this week, Ford enables all dealers to sell EVs, but is that a good thing? And who's bigger, oil or clean energy? The answer, I hope, will delight you. After we catch up on our week, we'll get off to all those stories, plus the lightning round. And Brian and I have some personal news this week. I know you just got back from a trip to the United States of America.
Yeah.
Which you'll be talking extensively about. But I have news, and I've put it into a song.
We've got COVID. We've got COVID. COVID finally came to our house. It's been 4.25 years. But COVID came to our house.
Oh, the humanity.
Yeah. A week ago Friday, my partner, he was sick coming home from work. So she went to Costco, of course.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know. She needed something. So, yeah.
You do, but I heard that there has been a bit of a COVID outbreak here. Our friend Mark was visiting from Toronto and he caught it.
In Regina, in our city.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. That sucks. You come here, you get COVID from all the hicks.
Yes,
Well,
I came to Regina and all I got was COVID.
It's probably thanks to my partner going to Costco, patient zero from the new wave. So I didn't get it. It's been...
You still haven't gotten it after all this time.
I am a god, Brian. I wish to be worshipped. Unless I was symptom-free, because I didn't bother testing, I had zero symptoms, nothing. And we isolated her. She did a COVID test eventually. I just read an article that said, if you got a summer cold, it's probably COVID. And I didn't read it extensively, but I read the headline. So I said that to her, and she went downstairs after sitting sickly in bed Friday night and did a test, and it finally came up positive. And now you can't get tests. They used to get them out of the library.
Oh, yeah.
You can't even buy them on Amazon or anywhere. There's one place in our city, and it's a co-op grocery store on one part of town, and all the doctors say to go there, because I went to see my doctor about a regular checkup. By the way, I lost my family doctor, and I'm starting to see a new one. And
oh, no.
Yeah, she retired. So that's a problem. But I'm with the clinic, so they've recruited a new doctor, which is great.
Just for you.
Well, basically, I would assume so. She's going to need to put a lot of effort into me. As I get older, I've got more problems. So that's... My partner stayed downstairs on the floor. Was not a happy situation. We don't have an extra bedroom. The kid is home from university. Otherwise, 8 months of the year, she could have went in that room and it would have been fine. But it was also a good time of year because it's not too hot. It could be hot, but it's not. It's temperate. So I just left all the windows open and just completely aired out the house constantly, like 24/7, although it got kind of cold, and she came back to the master bedroom yesterday night or the night before last, and I still don't have COVID. So she's still testing positive, but that doesn't matter because people test positive. It doesn't mean they're contagious. And
yeah, there's a few days where people are contagious.
It's just that when we started this podcast, the pandemic was developing around the world, and then, 4 episodes in or something, the pandemic was declared, so that's all we talked about for a while. It was a scary, horrible time, but I never got it. I was scared of getting it, and it finally came to our home, and I still haven't got it. And the kids, by the way, we got 2 kids at home, didn't get it. They kind of treated her like a leper, but yeah, that's... Psychologically, it was difficult to sort of isolate one of our beloved family members, but we did that, and it worked.
Well, at least you didn't put her in the shed.
I asked. She said no. She declined that invitation. But you just got back from a huge road trip, which we took a week off. And by the way, I really needed the week off. And it's not because of COVID. It's because, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we need to take weeks off every now and again because it can get, I don't know, it's to think about one thing too much. And it's good to just put your feet up and not put out an episode every once in a while. Not
absolutely.
Time, but
Yeah, so I spent a couple of weeks focusing on architecture. It was an architecture road trip, basically. And it does have a clean energy angle. I know I felt some pressure because last time, I went on a trip, I was talking about something and you it was to Yorkton, and I always find a clean energy angle to these stories, which are essentially about something else. But I have a doozy of a clean energy angle to this trip. Okay. Oh, yeah, it's really good. So hang on for that.
I will.
Because mostly this is about architecture. And it was an electric road trip. We took our Tesla Model S. So this was pretty long. It's 22 hours to our destination. But we just stopped in lots of places.
For newbies who are new to the show, or maybe who have forgotten, can you just update us? Because a lot of people don't have electric cars. They don't quite understand them. Your Model S is a longer range. So what kilometers and miles range do you get with your wheels that you got with the car?
Yeah, so I have the Tesla Model S, and it is rated for 650 kilometers, which I'm trying to look at our chart here. This is around 400 miles of range, but it depends on what kind of wheels you have. So I have the sort of larger wheels for the summer, so more like 600 kilometer range, 375 miles, something like that. And this is a slightly difficult route to take because there is one gap that's quite large, like it's about 400 kilometers, 300 miles between Estevan, Saskatchewan, and Bismarck, North Dakota.
That's nasty.
So
that's a scary range. You couldn't do that in the winter, for example, or even cooler weather.
You couldn't do it in most electric cars, but because the Model S is one of the longer range ones. And in fact, first of all, the wind was insane, both on the way down there and on the way back. Crazy, crazy prairie winds. On the way down there, 2 full days of nothing but insane wind.
So that affects your range, right? Like electric cars are very efficient, so when something goes up against them, you lose your range quickly. Because
you notice it.
Yeah.
But so it was 2 days of that on the way down, but it was mostly a tailwind, so it wasn't really an issue. But then on the way back, we did have to do that 4-hour drive, the long span with a big side wind. So we did use a lot of juice. Like it would normally take about 75% of the battery, and it took more like 90% of the battery to do the same thing. So, I learned from that I would not do that trip in the winter. It's just too risky.
Wow.
In the winter, you lose a bit of range, and I think it's not doable in the winter. But because it was summer, we managed to do it.
Is there any major centers that might get a charger in the meantime between Estevan, Saskatchewan, and Bismarck, North Dakota?
In that long gap is Minot, North Dakota, and it's surprising that they don't have a charger there. So I imagine that will come soon. And there's probably a hotel there with a charger, so you could stay overnight at one of the chargers. And then the other thing in terms of charging, we went through St. Paul. We went back to the Fitzgerald Theater where we saw a live podcast on one of my other trips. And we saw Varietopia with Paul F. Tompkins, the comedian. And he does a variety show that tours. And it was at the same theater, the Fitzgerald Theater in St. Paul, which is this fantastic
with music
old theater.
And jugglers and clowns and monkeys. And
mostly music and comedy. Those are kind of the two things. But yeah, a nice variety show. And then as soon as you get south of Minneapolis, I found there was tons of chargers. Like there's almost too many chargers because, there was too many choices. It made it a little bit confusing. And one time we ended up in Normal, Illinois. We charged in a parking garage. It was like a third floor of a parkade, as we call it in Canada. And we realized afterwards, okay, that was dumb. Like we could have gone to other chargers, but we just never had been there before. So we never thought to check. It was 3 levels up in a parkade. It was just kind of annoying. But, there's so many chargers that you don't need to do that.
Did you know it was a parkade at least when you got there, or a parking garage?
No, we didn't think to check. It's just like, okay, well, let's go to this one. And then
a non-Tesla owner would use PlugShare, and it would say located on the 3rd floor of the parking garage.
Yeah,
nice scenery.
It's just and electric road trips, if you've never taken one, they are different than gas trips. You need to do a little bit more research and planning, but usually it's not too onerous. But in this case, it was more planning than I expected because like I say, there were just so many options, and the car will kind of send you to one, but you think, well, I don't want to go to that one because we're going to have lunch an hour later. So let's plan another one. And it actually took quite a bit of time to do that planning, which was slightly annoying. But yeah, south of Minneapolis, the chargers get way more dense. There's a lot more electric cars in like Illinois and Wisconsin. Minnesota still doesn't have that many.
Is that right?
But
so that's where I'm surprised about Wisconsin a little bit.
Yeah. As
Major
soon as you
swing
get down to
state, by the
Wisconsin.
way.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And Wisconsin is absolutely lovely. It was really my first trip there. I'm now a huge fan of Wisconsin. And we had planned to stop at this thing called the House on the Rock, which is in Spring Green, Wisconsin. We went there, and it's this weird mansion built by an eccentric millionaire who died a couple of decades ago. So he's got this very weird house that he built, and you tour that. And then he has all these weird collections. Like he's got this massive carousel. It's like the most expensive carousel in the world, merry-go-round.
They turned it into a museum. It's basically
and it's the
Charles Foster.
Yeah.
What's the Citizen Kane character? Kane. Charles Foster Kane.
Charles Foster Kane. Citizen Kane, yeah.
And then they just left it all and said, hey, we'll turn this into a museum.
And we knew about it because they had used the carousel in the American Gods TV show. That's where we had first seen it. They used it as a location. And we kind of looked it up. Wow, this place looks amazing. And then automated instrument. Like the guy was basically a hoarder of weird things. And one of the things he loved was automated instruments.
I'd be a hoarder of weird things if I was rich, I think.
Yeah. They had literally like full orchestras of automated instruments. One of them had like animatronic, mannequins, like robots basically playing violins and like it was insane, absolutely crazy. Wow. So, highly recommended the House on the Rock in Spring Green, Wisconsin. And so we're driving through and we look over to our left and there's a building and we're like, hey, that looks like a Frank Lloyd Wright building. And sure enough, it was. So it turned out Frank Lloyd Wright lived around there. We didn't even know this when we planned the trip. But there's the visitor center, which was designed by him, and it's a restaurant. And then you can book tours to go to his home and studio, which is just a couple miles away. So we did a tour of Frank Lloyd Wright's home and studio called Taliesin, and he had a bit of a school there. He would, mentor architects, and we were among the first to go in. They recently renovated the theater. They used to put on small theater productions at this place, and we were among the first guests to see it after it had been like a multi-year renovation. So yeah, I got to see all these Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, which we hadn't even planned. But the real goal, the destination, was Columbus, Indiana, which is this small town in Indiana, about 50,000 people, that is world-renowned for its architecture. And I only knew about it because there's a movie called Columbus. It's from 2017 with John Cho and Haley Lou Richardson. And this is fantastic. It's one of my favorite movies. If you love like art house movies that include lots of architecture, you're going to love this movie. It's so great. So I didn't know the full history of the town.
That's a very specific Brian-like audience.
Oh,
though.
Yeah. It's like this movie was absolutely designed for me. It's one of my favorite movies. But I didn't know the full history of the town. I just thought, oh, this would be a fun road trip. It's drivable. We can visit all these cool buildings that were in the movie. And then we just learned more about it. So there's sort of more to the story. There's a reason why Columbus has all these cool buildings. And we stayed in one of them that's in the movie, the Inn at Irwin Gardens, which is not modernist. It was built in 1864, and it still stands, and now it's open as a bed and breakfast, and they used it in the movie Columbus. So we got to stay there. It's got this historic garden that was designed. It was like based on one of the gardens of Pompeii. When they uncovered Pompeii, they discovered this garden, and they designed it kind of after that. But so the place we stayed, it was the childhood home of J. Irwin Miller, who's the key figure in the town of Columbus. And I'm getting to the clean energy angle here.
Was it a bed and breakfast?
Yes, it was a bed and breakfast. It was his childhood home, this famous rich guy, J. Irwin Miller. So he grew up, he was, Cummins was the family business, and it's based in Columbus, and they make diesel engines, and that's where the clean energy angle comes from. So,
Cummins? That Cummins diesel engine?
Cummins, yeah.
Cummins? Like
Cummins.
That's, you see that on the side of large jacked up pickup trucks around here in farm country.
No, there is, what is it? One of the famous pickup trucks. I don't know. It's in my notes, but yeah, they make pickup trucks for like, Dodge trucks or something.
Yeah, that's right. I think
engines.
that's one of them. Ram, perhaps.
Yeah, so we stayed in his childhood home, J. Irwin Miller, and he was a rich guy because he became the CEO of Cummins, which was the family business. He went into the family business. He became the president eventually. And so he was a super rich guy for this super successful company and had two interests, and they were civil rights and architecture. So he was one of the people that established the National Council of Churches in the U.S., and he was part of religious delegations that met with John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson that helped push for civil rights legislation in 1964. And then his other main interest was architecture, and he was very interested in modern architecture. He was built, he was born around the turn of the century, but, he really loved things that were new, the new approaches to architecture. So in 1954, he started the Cummins Foundation, and in 1957 made an offer to the town that the foundation would pay all the architects' fees for new public buildings in Columbus, as long as they picked from a list of like the super cool architects of the time. So the architects that have built buildings include Eero Saarinen, who's known for like Toronto City Hall and the Dulles Airport, and the TWA terminal at JFK, and his father, Eliel Saarinen, and I.M. Pei, who did the addition to the Louvre in Paris. He's a very famous architect, I.M. Pei. And he did the public library in Columbus, like long before he did the Louvre, and Kevin Roche. And so there's an amazing list of about 70 super cool buildings in this small town of only 50,000 people. And Cummins, meanwhile, headquartered in Columbus, has grown up to be this incredibly huge business. It's worth about $37 billion. They have 75,000 employees around the world. About 8,500 of those are in the town of Columbus. They do $28 billion in sales every year, and the focus is
How big
diesel
is Columbus
engines.
population-wise again?
50,000 people.
So 8,500, that's,
Work
like
for the
1 in
company.
6 practically.
Yeah.
And if they knew what we knew, they might think that the diesel engine may not have a future.
Okay, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
The clean energy angle.
Did they run you out of town?
So, they started, the company was in 1919, and they didn't invent the diesel engine, but that's what they're known for. In many ways, they sort of perfected the diesel engine. So they have operations in 197 countries. And, the head of the company loved architecture. He built this thing that's now known as the Miller House in Columbus. And it was designed by Eero Saarinen, and it was declared a U.S. historic landmark in 2000. And since he passed away, his kids donated it to the town, and it's now a museum. It's a tourist attraction, and it's this super cool, modern 1960s building. And, it's just super futuristic, as we would have called it at the time. And so now they just have an endless stream of tourists doing architecture tours down there. We did the Miller House, and then we did a general architecture where they drive you around the town. But yes, the question I had when we're driving around and the tour guide is telling us Cummins and diesel engines, this is the foundation. And he did say they have a large R&D center in Columbus. So a lot of the people that work there are doing R&D, and they have another one, I think, in India. It's a huge, huge company. And he said they are working on the next technology, things like hydrogen. And I did some Googling, and I tried to sort of figure out, well, how serious are they about changing? And I didn't find too much. So if anybody of our listeners know what Cummins is doing in terms of R&D, I do know, they've been working on things like hydrogen. And then there was a story about electric highways, which we've talked about before, where you put wireless charging in underneath the highway. And theoretically, if cars and trucks have, wireless charging mechanisms, they can drive on the highway. Well, they're building one of these in Indiana, and Cummins is one of the partners in it. It's basically a test project. They're doing several miles of this, and it's going to cost $11 million. We've talked about it before. I don't think there's much of a future to this because it's super expensive, and all the cars and trucks would have to have the hardware to do this. But this is the real question: is Cummins going to be a thing? Are they going to be like Motorola and Nokia? Are they going to be able to switch?
Well, Brian,
you know?
here's the thing. Motorola and Nokia, they didn't consume a large portion of a major U.S. capital. So I'm a little bit worried about that. I'm getting very bad vibes about this. Unless you have something miraculous to tell me, I don't have a positive future for that. You might as well, maybe you can buy one of these places for for next to nothing. That's a horrible, morbid thing to say, but I mean, it doesn't. They don't have a future. I'm sorry.
One of the historic buildings is up for sale now. It was the first modernist bank in America, and it's featured heavily in the Columbus movie. It's the super cool modern bank. No one had ever done a modern bank before. This was the 1950s. It was all open and airy with big glass, and it's for sale now. And it was the Cummins Convention Center. They had bought it and turned it into an event center, but they recently put it up for sale. So, maybe that's a side of the future.
I find this quite interesting. I'm not sure what to say about it, though, because I have nothing good to say about it. I will say that, when you start talking about putting electromagnetic charging in roads, then you are assuming that the technology that we have today in America is all that we're ever going to have. And we know that batteries are rapidly advancing now. They're becoming way cheaper. They're becoming more energy dense, and they're charging faster. So why, if you can charge your vehicle in 10 minutes, why would you put it into the road? I mean, and then have that road break down and need repairs, and you can only charge for a few minutes. I mean, it would have to be very long, to charge. So depending on if you're going highway speeds. And we know that trucks are going to become I have no doubt that long range semi-transportation is not going to be an issue anymore, because we're on the cusp of it now. And if we're there now almost, then that's nothing. The batteries that are even in the system in China can come here and solve that problem right now, even if we don't make progress.
I Googled it to see if Cummins was working on like electric semis or anything like that, because they do basically large vehicles. And I didn't find anything. But again, if any of our listeners knows about what Cummins is working on, let us know.
Yeah, but that's scary for 1/6 of the population in a city that has thrived on combustion engines for, so long. What else do you have?
Okay, so speaking of weird technologies that are probably not necessary, probably not going to become a thing, hydrogen e-bikes. This was a really interesting story. This is from Micah at Electrek.
Oh, no.
And,
I'm sorry. Were you done your trip already?
That's it for the trip.
Okay, well, I've got other news that I wanted to my own personal news. I'll be brief. I didn't go anywhere.
Okay.
Well, I kind of did, Brian. I went to the Pride Parade in Regina. And I'm always taking flack from you on this show for not getting out of the house. Well, I went out of the house, and thousands of people came up to me because I sat you sit on the side of the parade route, and they come up and they give you bubble gum and say Happy Pride. And it was the most joyous thing I've seen since the before times. I was really quite moved by it. And you've heard me talk about how I dislike my city, that we're full of rednecks here. Well, that was an opportunity to change that, because everyone who was there and being an ally of the Pride Parade, and everyone in the Pride Parade, and there was thousands, it was the biggest one yet. I had gone to the Toronto Pride Parade in 1998, and that was quite an experience. You've been in Toronto since then, but I don't know if it's grown, but there's 1 million people. Like, I've never been to something where 1 million people attend. But back then it was 1 million people, and it was just quite remarkable. And, everyone on the main streets, there's apartments and people hang out of their windows and watch, and it's just all kinds of crazy and fun. But I felt rejuvenated and happy about it. I also had the feeling, and I know you're going to poo-poo this, but I think the Clean Energy Show should have a parade float. And I don't know if Musk has offended, queer people at all yet, but if he has, then we can't take your Tesla. We'd have to take my Nissan Leaf. we could take the Bolt, but the Leaf would be more, organic. But yeah, no, I mean, people give out business cards. My daughter was really excited when I came up with this idea. She says, I want you to do it, because she's part of the Gay Straight Alliance at her school. And she said you could put one of those QR codes on the side of the car and they could find your podcast and, put a few rainbows up and balloons and things and give out something. I don't know what we would give. It costs about $50 for a nonprofit, but I don't know if they would consider us a nonprofit for sure, because we're not really an organization, but $200 for profit. And, as far as our marketing budgets go, I mean, it's pretty small, and I think it would be a lot of fun. And, I don't know what we give out. I think Tootsie Rolls would be good, because I really enjoyed the Tootsie Rolls I got. I didn't get a lot of them.
Sure.
But, I got a lot of garbage too. Like there was politicians there giving out crap, and it's actually, environmentally speaking, it wasn't very good. Also, I have a clip from that, because you know what, Brian, also drove me to say that we should have a float is not one EV.
Mm-hmm.
Hundreds of vehicles of all kinds, trucks, pulling trailers, cars, vans, school buses, city trucks. Not one was an EV. And even the Shriners had their little cars there, which I was trying to explain to my kids that, even when I was a kid, this was a thing at parades. Parades were a thing, but they were there. And I know the Shriners don't give a rat's ass about the cause, but they were there in their combustion little cars making stink. And we could smell the stink. And that's another thing is like, it smelled. We were very happy in a very cheerful atmosphere, but really these very slow moving vehicles walking at, a quarter of walking pace were stinking us all up. And, especially when the bigger vehicles come in. So, yeah, if you're listening to the Electric Car Associations, why aren't you there? Huh? Local electric car associations, you should be there driving like a fleet of electric vehicles. People will get a breath of fresh air while you pass. Yeah. And you can give out information and things. Yeah, you should have been there. And I thought we could have been there too. Because there was like, one alcohol counselor had like 2 vehicles for her alcohol counseling service. So I figured we could have your sexy red Model S or something like that. If Musk doesn't offend anybody in the next year, that would be a very fun thing to do. And my daughter would come and she would help give out candies or whatever. Anyway, that's a thought. I also have not a book review because I haven't read it, but I've got a Book Nook section. This is something I got from the library. This is from Mark Jacobson, which we've quoted a lot on the show. He's a Stanford University professor. It's called 100% Clean Renewable Energy and Storage for Everything. I don't think this is his latest book. This is one from a couple of years ago. And oh, look, I've got a Pride bookmark. This is one thing that they hand out. Now I've got bookmarks. They're very colorful. And basically, Brian, this is our podcast in book form. Like practically everything we talk about is in this book. So if you're curious to read more, the author is Mark Jacobson. There's a Z or a Z in the middle, depending on what country you live in. And it's got everything we talk about and all the solutions. And, even induction cooktops are discussed like in a paragraph here. And every little thing that we've ever mentioned on the show is in that book. So go to your local library and request it if it's not there, or buy it. Or I think there's an audiobook of one of his things too, but I couldn't get a hold of it. And that's my update, so we can get on with the show now.
Yeah, and if we weren't so lazy, we would write a book as well.
Sure.
Okay,
well, we can get AI to do it. We just feed all of our podcasts and, hey, make a book out of this. I don't think that's far-fetched at all.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's not that far-fetched, sadly. Okay, so from Micah at Electrek, hydrogen e-bikes. So this is something I did not see coming. Did you ever think that we would have hydrogen-powered?
I don't understand that.
Electric bicycles.
We think about putting hydrogen in the bigger things like ships, like cargo ships and maybe semi-trucks. But a bicycle? Explain this to me.
Yeah, well, and a quick primer for if you don't know what hydrogen-powered electric vehicles are. The hydrogen really is just an energy storage mechanism. It's like the gasoline, right? Like you just store the energy as hydrogen, and then you have this electrolyzer that converts the hydrogen into electricity. So really this is an electric bike. It's just instead of a battery, it has hydrogen, and the only exhaust is water. So this is going to drip out a bit of water. And yeah, the idea is that you would have these sort of bottle-sized hydrogen canisters. So there's already propane canisters like this that are kind of similar. So these ones are hydrogen. But the thing that I found most interesting about this is that they're also selling a machine that makes the hydrogen. And apparently these are a thing that are around already. I didn't know about this, but you can make hydrogen in your own home with this sort of countertop machine. And it uses electricity. So depending on how clean your grid is, or if you have solar panels or whatever, it may or may not be clean hydrogen. If you're making it
So it's
from
like a soda
electricity that
stream,
comes
except
from-
for hydrogen.
Yeah, that's right. It's a soda stream. And you can swap it out. It's, much like you would a battery, which is, again, the thing that makes this kind of weird. Well, why don't you just use a battery then? Because we already have e-bikes that have swappable batteries that are kind of similar. And the answer, it says that they're maybe targeting, businesses rather than individuals, that this might make sense for like bike rental companies for some reason. Again, I don't know why, these canisters would be more convenient than
Well, I've rented
batteries.
an e-bike in Vancouver, and somehow they manage to charge them when they're docked, and it doesn't seem to be an issue.
Yeah.
So I don't know what problem they're solving, because you certainly don't need the distance that batteries can't give you on a bicycle. You're not going to go, 5,000 miles on a trip on your bike with a hose attached to you to drip down for the urine. That's not going to happen. Your bum's
and-
going to get sore.
The range isn't particularly great either. It says each canister about 60 kilometers or 36 miles of riding.
No. No.
It's probably lighter. The canisters are probably lighter than
I don't
batteries,
care.
So maybe
You're
could,
still making a hydrogen, a fuel cell technology on a bike, which will be stolen in itself to make, I don't know what ungodly thing they would use that for. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. We've had some dumb things on this show, Brian. This makes no sense. I can go 60 kilometers on my bike. If I didn't weigh 1,000 pounds, if I weighed a normal weight, my bike would go quite far. Easily 60 kilometers. It's rated for 60 kilometers.
I agree. It seems weird. It's not what I would spend my energy on. If I had a startup, I would be working on bicycles, but I guess they're taking the chance that if hydrogen for transport does become a thing, they're on the ground floor. But these home generators for hydrogen, I'd never heard of that before, and I thought that was cool.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know. I may put it in your robot or something, but not your e-bike. I mean, the e-bike thing has been solved.
Ooh, robots that explode. That'd be fun.
Just if you shoot it properly, if it gets in a shootout at a bank, that'd be bad. Because I would send my robot to the bank to get my money for me. I mean, why wouldn't I? So Ak Hoekstra, he is the director of Neon Research. He is a popular person on social media for clean energy. I follow him. Most people in this space follow him. And he spent his Sunday working on what cheap modern batteries would mean for society and the power grid and everyone else by 2030. This would only be sort of a benchmark at 2030 where there'd be fairly cheap and things would start to happen then, right?
Yeah, and this is the competition really for things like hydrogen, which we're just talking about. So how well it's progressing with batteries is a big deal.
So the learning curve on batteries, he says, is very predictable. When we say learning curve on this sort of thing, we mean the more you make, the cheaper they are, because some of these technologies are new. Solar was once new, and every time you double it, something happens. Well, with batteries, the prices are reduced around 25%. So every time you double production, and even now, we're just getting started. Like it's really big now, but it's still early days, as you say, so 25%. And it's even steeper than and more predictable than the learning curve for solar panels, which has gone down tremendously, way over 90% in the last 20 years. And the solar panels are the poster child for this sort of learning curve, but batteries are actually better, more predictable. Installed batteries grow about 59% per year now. That's installed.
Wow.
Sodium batteries, which we talked about on the show, that's an alternative to lithium batteries. You just replace, it's not just replacing the lithium, it's rebalancing the chemistry overall. But sodium is similar to lithium on the periodic table. So, and it's much cheaper because that's table salt if you're not familiar with sodium. I have perhaps too much of it in my diet, in my processed foods. So they're going to become very cheap. They're just hitting the market now. So they've got a long way to go to become cheaper. And sodium in itself is 30 times cheaper than lithium, just that part of the battery. Like lithium is an expensive part of lithium batteries, even though it doesn't make up the whole battery. It's not just lithium, it's just one of the things in there. This is going to affect local demand response. What is local demand response? That's when you have a power grid and suddenly you need extra power, but it trips the grid because, you know, something turns on, there's just not enough power, and then suddenly the grid collapses in an area, or, you know, equipment on that grid breaks and it's very costly to replace. So if you need extra power on the grid, if you distribute it with cheap batteries to businesses and homes, then that can improve the resilience of the power grid, and it'll cost less to reinforce that grid as a result. We talk about how the grid needs to expand. Well, in a lot of ways it doesn't if we can distribute our storage power throughout homes. Batteries will significantly support solar and wind energy, as we know that's already happening. The grid that emerges is very different from the current grid. Every home could be protected from blackouts and voltage fluctuations, and it can absorb any peak in solar production, because sometimes you got, you know, even now we already have places in the world that have too much solar energy in the middle of the day. Or they can, you know, when peak demand is in the day when people come home from work and you need extra power, you can suck that solar out of people's homes and onto the grid. The 20 kilowatt hour battery, that's kind of like a battery that you might have in your home for power that people might use, like a Tesla wall pack. What are they called? Power packs? Power walls. So 20 kilowatt hours is about half the size of it's about almost the size of my Nissan Leaf, my old electric vehicle. That was all it did for about 120 kilometers or 80 or 90 miles of range. So he thinks it'll only cost around $1,000 by 2030 and have a payback time of less than 3 years. Of course, it depends where you live, depending on how expensive electricity is. The more expensive it is, the quicker the payback time. So I don't imagine that includes the cost of installation. It's always a big cost. And battery costs dropped from $1,500 a kilowatt hour. So that's like 1,000 watts for an hour was $1,500 of storage in 2008 to less than 100. So that's a 15th. That's for NMC and LFP batteries were around $47 right now. Those are the cheaper ones, lithium iron phosphate batteries. See, there's different chemistries, and sodium is going to be one of them. Future prices could drop, he says, to $8 a kilowatt hour by 2030, with sodium batteries becoming even cheaper after that. That's ridiculously cheap. We were waiting for $100 for cars to become a parity. Well, he's saying there's a pathway to $8. I'm speechless. Materials costs for sodium batteries could be around $1 per kilowatt hour. Cheap batteries will stabilize the grid, prevent blackouts, and manage peak electricity use. Households and businesses will use these batteries, reducing grid congestion. So they'll smooth things out on the grid. Everything will become, easier to do. The electricity grid will become decentralized, which means not just a big power plant, 100 miles south of the city. It's going to be in everyone's home. We're going to have solar on our roofs and power to store that solar in batteries. Standards and cryptography will be essential for integrating these new technologies. Stationary batteries will make energy more reliable and affordable. So yeah, it's a different grid. It's a different life. And it'll be worth our while to participate in this if we can invest $1,000 in a battery and actually save money after 3 years. Pays off. That's pretty fast payoff time for you to start saving money.
Yeah, I've certainly looked into home batteries and, so far they've still been a little bit too pricey. So, hopefully these become available soon, the cheap ones.
And we're talking 2030. We'd love to hear from our listeners, by the way. Please contact us by email, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. You can also leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. And Brian, we started to get a-holes giving us bad reviews on our social media platforms and places.
What?
Because they're mad. They're mad that we're right. So please counter these people who give us bad reviews because they are threatened by a cleaner world, I think. And Spotify and Apple, there's not that many, but it'd be nice if we got some more reviews from our actual listeners. Spotify and Apple podcasts are where the main places you can leave us a rating. Google Podcasts is what I used on Android, and it's gone now, and I'm using Pocket Casts, which is quite nice, although they charge you to use it on a desktop version, which doesn't make sense to me, because occasionally I will use my laptop to listen to a podcast. But it's actually better on my phone because my phone speakers are better, and I can use less energy if I'm falling asleep listening to a podcast and keeping my laptop open, so that's all good. So thanks for listening, people, and try and give us a rating if you can.
All right, so this is from NBC. So the Summer Olympics are coming up again in Paris, end of July, I think. Are you excited for the Olympics? You got Olympic fever, James?
I do not, and I'm kind of surprised that Paris is going all out trying to promote Paris. We all know what Paris is. We all envy Paris. We all wish we lived in Paris and could travel to Paris. They don't need the Olympics to promote themselves.
Well, my partner actually traveled to Paris a couple of months ago, and so I have an update, and like they're going to actually have some events right at the Eiffel Tower. So I think it's maybe the fencing or something. They're going to do it right at the Eiffel Tower. And while she was there, they were doing lots of drills. Like they had, all the cops kind of set up.
I was thinking about that. Paris has had, I was thinking about that this morning, actually. I was watching a video about Paris getting ready for the Olympics. And I worry about safety there. Yeah.
So they're doing these anti-terrorism drills. So they would be, visiting the Eiffel Tower, and then suddenly like 40 guys, with flak jackets would be, tearing by doing a drill or something. But anyway, so Paris, in anticipation, partly for the Olympics, about 10 years ago, they started trying to reduce their air pollution. So what happened is they have closed now more than 100 streets to motor vehicles. They have tripled the parking fees for SUVs, as we've talked about on the show. They have removed 50,000 parking spots and constructed more than 1,300 kilometers, 800 miles of bike lanes, since their mayor, Anne Hidalgo, took office back in 2014. So for 10 years now, they've been working on this, and they say that these changes have contributed to a 40% decline in air pollution in the city of Paris, which is remarkable.
It is remarkable, and if you think of the Beijing Olympics, Beijing has terrible air quality. They had to shut down factories for 2 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
Like that's a pretty big, effort to have to take to get the pollution down to a point where you could maybe run a 100-meter race and not die.
Yeah, or God forbid the marathon.
The marathon would really kill you. So that's it's surprising that they were concerned about air pollution, but in the summer it is at its worst because of the way the atmosphere works.
Yeah, so there's a quote here from the mayor. How did we achieve this? By assuming a major and radical rupture, the end of car dependence in Paris. And there's a quote here from Nicholas Klein, a professor of city and regional planning at Cornell University. For 100 years in the U.S., and of course this applies to Canada as well, we've built streets, neighborhoods, and cities around cars. And as a result, most people live in auto-dependent neighborhoods, and it's very hard to undo that. One of the reasons that James and I are so bullish on electric cars is we live in one of those cities where it's very hard to undo the car infrastructure. And the public transit is not great. We don't have enough of a critical mass to really have frequent public transit. So we are very much dependent on our cars here. And it says the changes were inspired in part by Carlos Moreno, a professor at the University of Paris and a former Hidalgo advisor. Moreno pioneered the concept of the 15-minute city, where all your basic necessities are within a short walk or bike ride. Of course, Moreno says there's been opposition from climate skeptical people. Those are the people leaving negative reviews of our podcast. the automotive lobby and drivers in particular, but this is no longer the time for cars, and we need to fight against them for a low-carbon future. And meanwhile, the push for 15-minute cities has become political fodder for the far right, most notably giving rise to fringe conspiracy theories that claim that they are part of a shadowy plot to surveil people and restrict their freedoms. It's one of those things that's so ridiculous, I hate to even talk about it on the show, but it is a thing.
It seems like there's going to be people coming up with conspiracies no matter what. It doesn't matter how far-fetched they are. It's just, like our city of Calgary here in Canada that I visit and have relatives in, they've got an infrastructure problem where their main feeder pipe for the water main from the city, one big part of the city, has failed after 50 years. And they're asking the whole city to conserve water so that they have enough pressure to fight fires. And they're not doing it. A lot of times they're not doing it. And now, of course, there's conspiracy theories. There's a whole area that they're trying to control us. And come on, I don't know. They're going to dig up this pipe in the middle of the city and tell you to restrict water because that's going to be helpful to their evil government. I don't know. How stupid do people have to be, Brian? How stupid? It's crazy.
It's very weird, although it is strange that it is so, like, it's such a big event. Like, this is not just a couple of days. Like, this is now going to go on for weeks before they can get this fixed. And so, you're supposed to try and avoid doing all kinds of things with water if you can. And lots of people don't like that.
And I see people saying, I bought $200 worth of plants. I'm sure as hell not going to let them die. So maybe you shouldn't buy $200 worth of plants. I don't know. Maybe you should collect rainwater because they do get rain from time to time. I don't know. I'm going to take a break now. I have to go to the washroom, so I'll be right back. I know it's unusual, but I drank a lot.
Check. Still rolling?
Still rolling. So, I was going to mention that leftover from my garage sale a couple of weeks ago was a headboard, and it's a huge ordeal because I put it on Facebook Marketplace, and no one responded. And then a woman in the next city over, Moose Jaw, decided she wanted it, maybe. So she's constantly messaging me for a $20 headboard. And it's just, 2 messages in, it wasn't worth it anymore. And it's like, can you go measure the distance between the holes? Can I spray paint it? And then yesterday she came to get it, and I wasn't home. And I said, put the money in the mailbox. And she was sending me all these messages that, are you home? I don't have an envelope to put it in the mailbox. and then finally, scratch all that. It doesn't fit in the car. I'll come back tomorrow. So she's still coming back now any minute. And it's just, I'm never doing it again. I'm never selling anything again. I want to not send things to the dump, but this is ridiculous. I mean, I could take 2 weeks out of my life and sell everything individually all at once and constantly. I need an AI for that. but it's just
Yeah.
I'm going to reenact it on my comedy podcast. It's just that ridiculous that this conversation is just goes on and on and on. Anyway, Italy is readying a G7 plan for food security and energy in Africa to reduce migrants. This is an interesting strategy. I don't know if they're using this as an excuse to say, hey, this is going to solve our migrant problem, which is very political, but it's something they're working on. Italy and its allies in the G7 want to help Africa with clean energy and food security, and they think that if you can get, an economy going on clean energy, then people will have money. There will be money going into the economy. People will be saving money on energy, and then people will be less likely to want to migrate to Europe. So Italian leader Gregorio Meloni wants Italy to, and I probably pronounced that horribly. I don't know that we have any listeners in Italy, but, if we do, I'm sorry.
Get an AI to say it.
Sure. She wants to, it's a she, right? Yeah, she's a far-right person who wants to connect the EU and Africa with clean energy. And she wants to be kind of Italy to be the go-between between Africa and Europe so that she'll make some money or, help with their economy as well. It's called the Matai Plan. This might cost around 5.5 billion euros or $6 billion US dollars. They are creating financial tools with the African Development Bank, EU, and the G7 to support these projects. The goal is to help Africa grow and reduce the number of migrants coming to Italy. I think it's a good idea. As the African economy is growing and people are emerging from poverty, then why go to oil and fossil fuels if you can go right to clean energy and save money as well? Plus, it's mostly a good place for clean energy.
Yeah, they can skip a whole phase and they can go right to decentralized energy rather than centralized energy.
And that's kind of what they did with cell phones. They didn't build a telephone infrastructure and put telephone poles up everywhere. They just, cell phones was decentralized with cell phone towers and didn't have to do all the infrastructure. The Energy for Growth in Africa initiative will invest in clean energy and infrastructure in Africa. The Food Systems Initiative will help African countries improve their food supply and farming, and they might announce these plans at the G7 summit, which is coming up, which was on June 13th. So I don't know if they've done that or not. I'll update you next week if that has had any traction, but I think it's an interesting idea to say, to tackle the migrant problem with clean energy. Something even I hadn't thought about, but that's an interesting idea. If you help the economy, you help migrants not want to leave.
But what if they don't fix the migrant problem and they just make it a better world for nothing?
That would be a shame, Brian. That would be a total shame. So making it easier to borrow money is also important for Africa's infrastructure. That's one of the big issues when we talk about decarbonizing the world with third world countries, is that they need, especially the global south, needs financing to be able to make that happen.
Okay, so Ford is now enabling all of their dealers to sell EVs, and this brings 90% of Americans within 25 miles of a Ford dealer selling electric vehicles. So we talked about this a while ago, that Ford had this program where they were charging money to their dealers to, certify them for electric vehicles and to make sure that they were kind of up to speed. But now they've just decided to open it up to everybody. So some of those early dealers might be a little annoyed because they spent some money on this early on. Ford has promised that they're going to, make some kind of a special deal for those dealers so they're not too annoyed. But this is a big deal because Ford is the second best-selling EV brand in the U.S., not including Hyundai Kia if you put the two together. Hyundai Kia are basically the same company, but two different brands. So they sold 37,000 electric cars so far this year, and that's double the number that they sold last year. So Ford, Hyundai, and Kia, they're all making some progress in terms of sales in the U.S.
And I've seen, some of the lease deals for Mustang Mach-E's in the United States.
Yeah.
Super cheap. Like, it's down to almost what I'm paying for my Bolt in Canadian dollars. And, it's a much better car. It's like a bigger car and more capable, faster charging and all that. So, I don't know. But Ford probably losing money on those, but they are aggressively pricing them now.
Yeah, it's still going to be a challenge, but Biden's 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles should help the Ford out quite a bit.
It's time for the lightning round.
The Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Canada's EV sales skyrocketed 53%, speaking about such things, in the first quarter of 2024 compared to Q1 of 2023. That's pretty significant. Brian.
Yeah. And sometimes, you hear these stories that, oh no, it's all over for growth in electric vehicles. But the only thing that's changed is the rate of growth has slowed. Like if you're only selling 100 electric vehicles, it's fairly easy to double that to 200 electric vehicles. So you've doubled sales. But now that we're getting into the range of millions of electric vehicles sold, the growth is slower. But don't believe those stories that say that electric vehicle sales have stalled. It's not true.
Yeah, during the pandemic, I think they were going 60% a year. So if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be complaining. We'd say, okay, well, they're growing steadily at 20% or 21% overall in the world. Some countries a lot faster than others, obviously, like China. But because of that, it's like the stories are all, even Bloomberg is writing negative stories about the growth, that they're not anticipating as much. And some of that, I don't know. Tesla was a leader in that. And I just wonder if their brand hit from Musk has affected that, or if misinformation has affected it. Like, I have to wonder. I don't know, if that's been measured or surveyed or anything like that. The IPCC says the renewables are now 10 times more efficient than nuclear at CO2 mitigation. So nuclear fans, take note. That is pretty significant difference. It's not 2x, it's 10x.
Yeah, and part of it being nuclear just takes too long to build.
EVs with 300 miles of range, that's around, 500 kilometers, are now cheaper than the average U.S. car price. So, yeah, and that's kind of like the threshold that, speaking of surveys, that people said they needed was 300 miles of range in the U.S. So now you can, but then, U.S. car prices are ridiculous. What is it, 46,000 is the average now?
Yeah.
That's crazy. A new report finds that 1/3 of all ocean-going ships are carrying fossil fuels. We've mentioned this before in the show. This is a new report, so I'm just reiterating it.
Yeah, once we get rid of fossil fuels, there will be way less ocean cargo traffic.
Oh, it's time for CS Fast Fact. Globally, soil stores more carbon than vegetation and air combined. So if you stir up the soil in farming the wrong way, it can be a problem. In China, more than 60% of electric cars sold in 2023 were already cheaper than their conventional equivalents. So look for that to come to a country near you, because that's the first country to do it. So why bother? I say, why? Why would you buy? I know a lot of these cars are short range and cheap, but still, I don't know. I wouldn't want to buy a combustion car at this point. Microsoft emissions rose 30% since 2020, and not because of AI, like has been mentioned here on the show and in the news a lot. It is not driven by energy use, but by the manufacturing of steel and cement in its data centers. Actually, building the data centers is using a lot, or creating a lot of carbon emissions. More Ferraris than hydrogen fuel cell vehicle cars were sold last year. And they don't sell a lot of Ferraris, Brian.
No, they don't.
Oil demand peak for road transport is just 3 years away. In China, it'll be hitting there even sooner. U.S. solar generation jumped 25.5% in March 2024 compared to the year before in March. So 25.5% more. That's growing fairly quickly. The IEA says peaking oil demand creates an amount of global excess oil production capacity only seen in the 2020 pandemic. And what happened there? I think we had negative oil prices for a while.
Negative oil prices, yep.
The world will run out of oil demand before oil supply. And that's not what the governments around here who have oil like to think. They've got their head in the sand. Swiss voters have approved a new electricity law that mandates PV systems, that's solar photovoltaics, solar panels, on large buildings. So you have to have them on large buildings if you're building one in Switzerland. This supports electricity communities and all other kinds of things. That's from PV Magazine. China is investing more in renewables this year, $359 billion US, than the United States, the EU, India, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa combined. The U.S. is the biggest investor in fossil fuels, by the way. That's $197 billion. So, not good. Another CES fast fact. 1 acre solar farm produces as much energy as 100 acres of corn ethanol. So sometimes people like to say biofuels. Well, it's a very inefficient solar reactor, solar panel. That's what the joke is, that you need 100 acres of it, and it's very complex. You're using the sun to make energy. Well, there's a better way, Brian. It's called a solar panel. And finally, this week,
burn that ethanol once you make it.
And finally this week, there are 7 Chinese solar companies that most people probably haven't heard of. They are already providing more energy in units of energy for the global economy than Exxon, Chevron, Shell, BP, and the other 7 sisters, so-called, who once dominated oil production. So if you look at a chart that we have, some of them are, dwarfing the closest competition. This is, how do they measure, joules or energy joules? That's how they're measuring the energy that each can produce. Well, solar is producing, looks like 4 or 5 times as much as Exxon, the biggest solar company. So yeah, that's energy. It's energy. It's just a different kind of energy. And nobody talks about things that way, but there's a new energy in town. It's cleaner, it's better, it's cheaper. Look out.
Yeah, and around here, when people say energy, what they really mean is oil and gas, but that is not the only way to make energy. So that's our show for this week. You can contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Around social media, we're Clean Energy Pod, and there are videos of our show on TikTok and YouTube, including special content, sometimes not featured on the podcast.
Oh, we've got a Clean Energy store, too. If you'd like to buy a hat, a T-shirt, or something like that, we'll have to come up with some Pride merchandise if we have a float next year. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as mentioned. You can also donate with PayPal. That helps, and we would like to thank everyone who's done that. There's a few people out there who are donating on a regular basis. We thank you. If you're new to the show, welcome. But remember, subscribe on that podcast app that you're using so you get our new shows every week, except for last week, and maybe another week in the summer or two. We'll see. Almost every week.
Yeah, we'll see you. In the meantime, see you next week.
The Clean Energy Show.